Hey, it's Harry Redknapp here. You're listening to a proper podcast. It's the Alan Hudson podcast. It's proper football, proper talk.
Well, hello again. Welcome to the Alan Hudson podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got another special podcast lined up for you today. We're going to pay our own little tribute to the late, great Denis Law, who sadly passed away last week and is an icon to Scots everywhere. But before we get to that, I'll hand you over to Alan, who's got some words about subscription for you.
Put that on, David.
Yeah, if you haven't subscribed, could you please subscribe for Tony and I so we can do some more shows? How does it go, Tone? You got to go on the...
Yep, people just need to click on the subscribe button, and people also feel free to include your comments on the podcast. Let us know whether you think the podcast is good, bad, or indifferent. All comments are more than welcome. We'd like to get your feedback. It would help us going forward.
I could have done that.
Well, you always complain that you don't. I ask you to do stuff, and when I don't ask you, you complain again. He's always complaining, Jim.
It's like a little bit like Malcolm and Wise, Jim, isn't it? You know, Eric and Ernie.
I'm definitely the one with the short, fat, hairy legs, Jim.
Yeah, we don't want to know about your sex life, Tony.
Before we carry on, we should introduce our guest today. One of Scotland's finest. It is, of course, Jim McCalliog. Jim, it's great to see you again.
Hi, Tony. Good to see you. Nice to talk to you. Nice to see Alan and talk to him as well.
Brings back my apprentice day memories, Jim. Seeing you when you were just setting it off at the bridge, you know. It actually was around the time 2 or 3 years prior. You'll probably be the same as me in saying this, that we got together today to do the show about, you know, the wonderful Denis Law, not just the wonderful Denis Law the footballer, but the wonderful Denis Law the person. And I was thinking this morning, strangely enough, you know, because I'm struggling with, you know, never had this problem as kids, you know, whatever. And in the playground on a Saturday, I read someone talk about Match of the Day in them days. Match of the Day was on about 5:30 on a Saturday night, if you can remember back. And I remember on the Saturday, I was a schoolboy. I was probably at the bridge, 13, 14, training, but nothing too serious. And we'd go and watch Match of the Day, have a quick bite to eat, and then afterwards we'd come out back in the street, being in May, that it's nice and bright, and we'll be in the street and we'll all be George Best, Bobby Charlton, or Denis Law, because Manchester United were on every Saturday, weren't they? Especially down in London, they were probably the biggest attraction of all time when them three were at their pomp. And George was obviously the new kid on the block, but and I remember going to Craven Cottage when I was 13, 14 with my little mate Bill Boyce, with the famous duo, the black kid and the white kid going, that makes a mockery of this other thing. But and seeing Denis there, and I remember Rodney Marsh coming through, and he used to copy everything that Denis done. Every time he would play with it, holding on to his cuffs, you know, like Denis did. Yeah, Denis had them little traits, and you knew what Denis was going to do before he actually done it. When he scored, you know, he was just a total one-off. He was actually the first showman, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and he, you know, and then when you met him years on, I'm not saying so much as a player, because he wouldn't get involved in the down George's after the games on a Wednesday. He would go home obviously early, but to get to know him in later years, he was just a gentleman. When he was just a lovely man off the street who just happened to be a superstar, you know. He's a lovely bloke. I mean, you obviously had a lot more to do with him from your Scotland days, yeah?
Yeah. But back in the day, Alan, when I was probably about 12, 13, Scotland used to play their internationals on a Wednesday afternoon. From my school was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes walk from Hampden Park, the national stadium. So I remember going to see Scotland play Czechoslovakia in a World Cup, I think it was a World Cup qualifier, and getting behind the goal, getting a lift in over the turnstile, and then getting behind the goal and watching the match. And when Denis came on, all you could see was this big blonde shock of hair. And of course, that day is history now. He scored 2 goals that day, and you know, he was everybody's hero. He was my hero after that, and he always will be, Alan. But
Yeah.
to then, like, probably I think it was 7 years later, to play with him at Wembley and kick the ball off. And my first touch, because I was playing in a number 9 jersey, was to pass the ball to my hero.
Yeah, you were
So,
nervous, when you were more nervous playing with him than being in front of 100,000 people, I believe.
yeah, I was more nervous meeting Denis because the other occasion in my life that really springs to memory, Alan, was when I was at Chelsea. And I remember us coming into training. I just signed professional then, and coming into training, and Tommy Docherty had a meeting before we went training, and he told us that the rest of the world team would be training at Stamford Bridge before the England game, which was on the Wednesday. And he said, I want all you young players to be at the bridge all the time and see what they do and watch them. And I says, and especially you young professionals, we want you there. So the first day they trained at Stamford Bridge, and we watched it. There was Denis Law, there was Puskas, Di Stefano, Copa, who else was there? Jalmo Santos. Guys, you know, Lev Yashin, the goalkeeper, they were all there. But Denis Law and Jim Baxter were 2 Scotsmen.
And then Eddie, would I be right in saying Eddie used to get in that team, Eddie Mack?
No, he didn't. He didn't get in that particular time. But I don't know about after that, Alan. I wouldn't like
He did,
to say
yeah.
about that.
He played it. They were the three known Brits really that got
No,
into the World 11.
yeah, I didn't know that. That's brilliant. Eddie was a magic guy as well.
Yeah.
But Denis was there and Jim Baxter. So they trained at Stamford Bridge on the Monday, but on the Tuesday they went to the White City. There was some kind of problem, but we went with them and we were in the dressing room. And of course, Baxter and Denis, they heard our accents and we were talking to them, and it was great to, you know, to talk to these guys and listen. And of course, it was a big honour for them to be playing for the rest of the world. Denis actually played at the beginning, and Jim Baxter come on later in the second half. But Denis scored the goal that day, and England beat the rest of the world 2-1. But that was fantastic. That was the first time I met Denis. Well, didn't meet him. I was there in the company talking. So that kind of, along with watching him at Hampden, that made him an even bigger hero, Alan. You do. As a kid, you're always looking for a hero, and I'm so glad I picked Denis Law because I thought he was a great role model. He's a role model. He's a wonderful man, was a wonderful man, and there was no edge on him, Alan. When he went on the field, that was his stage. He was fantastic. You would watch every move to see what he was doing, but he was also very feisty, and you didn't know when he was going to blow a fuse.
It was you can't believe it. You can't believe that, you know, how crossing that white line can change people. But I remember I was up in Manchester one night at a function, and some great names there, great faces, good lads. and Dennis was sitting on the table I was on. It wasn't like a dinner table; it was sitting around it in this function room, and I asked him quietly, but so people could hear as well, that I asked him if there was any truth that he was very well known at Chelsea for getting suspended over Christmas. He would always, the saying went that day, even when I was first in the team, and he would never play at Christmas and New Year because he wanted to go home for Hogmanay, and he would get booked at the right time in September, October, November, so he would miss that Christmas period. And I went to him, Dennis, I said, it's always been, I think of you and I think about that Christmas period because we all love Christmas and everything else, but you never played over Christmas, did you? And he kind of sat back and he went, no, there's no truth in that. He said, there's no truth at all. I said,
It's in the history books, Alan.
Yeah, but it's great, you know. But that's a forward-thinking footballer, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, he was. You know, when before I made my debut, Sheffield Wednesday played Manchester United on the Wednesday night, and the Scottish press wanted a photograph of me and Denis Law, and they asked me if I was up for it. I said, "You must be joking." So I said, "Yeah, that'd be fantastic." And before the game, we had a photograph, and I got talking to him for a couple of minutes before we went back into our own dressing rooms, and it was brilliant, Alan. I was more nervous at that for that occasion, seriously, than playing against England on the Saturday, Alan, because you know he was such a hero. I mean, I've total respect for the England team, but I was genuinely more nervous meeting Denis Law properly.
You were telling us off air earlier, Jim, that you were one of the only Scots around about that time who was quite pleased that England won the World Cup in 1966.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it was great. It was great for football. It was great for the game, and you know, different to quite a lot of other Scottish people. They really didn't want England to win the World Cup, but I seen it as a progression in my career and football getting bigger, and I was part of a great football industry. So I was absolutely delighted.
I could never get my head around that kind of way, the way of thinking that way, you know. I think I said when we last done the show, Jim, come meeting in 78, 79 when I was at Arsenal on tour and coming across Jock Stein and a few of the boys, Danny McCrane and people like that. But crossing paths with Jock Stein was one of my greatest moments of my life, you know.
Yes.
And I can only think that what he done by winning the European Cup with all them local lads was, you know, it wasn't even secondary to Brian Clough. It was on the same level as Brian Clough.
Yes.
But only Brian Clough did it with a lesser club. Having said that, you know, the Scottish League weren't seen as good as even now the Premier League or what it was for First Division. But what Jock Stein did was just colossal. It was unbelievable. And to meet him afterwards and see how humble a fella he was and everything else is... So I just can't get my head around people wouldn't want them to win it, you know.
Yeah,
English,
yeah.
you know, because... and he paved the way, didn't he? You know, you know.
Definitely, because of course the following year, that was when Sir Matt, when Man U won the European Cup. So it was a great time then, Alan, to be involved in football for myself. You know, European Cup winners 2 years in a row, Celtic in Scotland, and Man United in England. And of
Yeah.
course, then following on from that, Liverpool, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, teams like that have won the European Cup. And,
Yeah.
it's just always getting through the barriers, Alan, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think getting back to Denis is I was thinking this morning, well, you do, as we do, when we sit around, we talk about how would players compare to years ago and things like this. I mean, and you look at today's Arsenal, you look at today's Chelsea, you look at today's Spurs, and there's so many clubs today that supporters in Maine complain about we haven't got a centre forward. You know, we haven't got a goal scorer. We haven't got, and it's been at Chelsea. It's been said for years. They got the fella coming along now. I don't think he's the answer, but they're further away than ever. Than they had Osgood was probably the greatest, and then Drogba came along and he made a big dent into that. But Denis Law, can you imagine a Denis Law in today's football? I suppose what I'm trying to say about Denis was everything looks so difficult for front players today, and forwards, wingers, everything's 100 mile an hour, and Denis was so cool, He was he was a maverick, wasn't he? He was, and I know that Ferguson, he was, when he went to Manchester United, he was a little bit like yourself. He was a little bit like Denis Law, he was his hero as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember Paddy Queren said to me one day, the great Paddy Queren, a great fella. He said he was close to Fergie. Fergie always give Pat a job. Pat was still in a job now with him, bless him. And he said Fergie is he's just a Denis Law man, and that's some tribute, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. And I heard something this week, and it's so typical of Sir Alex Ferguson. A lot of things go under the radar, but Sir Alex actually went to see Denis 3 times a week while he was in the care home. That is absolutely, terrific, really.
Yeah.
Sir Alec has people saying this and that sometimes about him. He's obviously, he's so well liked in Manchester, but other people don't know the other side of Sir Alex as well. Sir Alex is a great guy, he helps people. He gives out lots of stuff. But as you know, to be a football manager, you have to be ruthless. But Sir Alex has definitely got a good other side to him as well. But with regard to Denis, I was very fortunate, Alan. I got a phone call from Denis's legacy, and they asked me if me and my wife would go to Aberdeen because Denis was getting the Freeman of the City, and he was also going to open the Christmas lights while we were there. And me, Denis, and Bobby Lennox, we were the 3 goal scorers in '67, and that was, that was part of it. And there was a sportsman's dinner there, and it was fantastic. I spent 4 days with Denis Law and his family, me and my wife, and it was just magical, Alan. It was magical. And he was no different to when he played. He was the same guy. And I mean, people come up to him and they say, Denis, how do you want to be remembered? And he'll tell you, he'll say, just as a nice guy.
Yeah, he always says that, yeah.
Jim, you mentioned obviously the famous game at Wembley in 1967 when Scotland dethroned the world champions, take us into the dressing room before that game. What was the mood like? What was the feeling amongst the Scots players as they prepare to take on the world champions?
To be honest, the feeling in the dressing room was one of confidence, total confidence, because in that dressing room, we had 4 players that were going to become European Cup winners. We had 2 players who played for Rangers. Rangers voted Rangers best ever player, John Gregg, and also Ronnie McKinnon. And there was 5 Anglos. There was Billy Bremner, there was Denis Law, there was Jim Baxter, there was Eddie McCready, Alan, and myself. So, that's a really good team. There's a lot of great players in there. And sorry, I've forgotten me, Billy Bremner, as well. So, we were very, very confident. And we knew that England were a good team because they proved that everybody they come up against, for 19 games, they were unbeaten. So it was going to be, we weren't going to be any shrinking violets in our dressing room. We were pretty confident, and we went out, and the thing that Scottish players tend to say is get in the opposition's faces. And that was what we did. If you watch the game, we straight away, Tommy Gemmell wins 2 good tackles. One, I think it was with little Alan Ball, and one with Jimmy Greaves. And that set the tone for the rest of the match. And we didn't give England a lot of time to settle in the ball, especially Bobby Charlton, because Bobby was an amazing footballer. So in the dressing room, it was a lot of laughter. We were all looking at, back then you used to get telegrams wishing you all the best. And I remember looking at my telegrams, funny enough, Alan, and I had a telegram from Don Revie, from Terry Venables, from Eddie Gray and Jim Lumsden. And I remember, these telegrams, because, it's always nice to know that people are wishing you well, Alan. So, yeah, we were good, Tony. We were absolutely good. And we couldn't wait for the game to start. And we were very confident. So I had all the ingredients of a great game.
Well, I could see why you were confident, because you had a bloody good team.
We did, Alan.
Yeah, and
Jimmy Johnson got injured, Alan. Jimmy Johnson was supposed to play. He got injured on the Wednesday, but Jimmy Johnson was the Willie Wallace came in for him, but that was the only change in the team.
So it could have been worse for England.
Well, we did have quite a lot of chances, Alan, but of course, Big Jack getting injured didn't help the England cause. But he went up front, and he just was a bit of a nuisance up there because of his height. So, it's always difficult when teams are, it's a good contest. The teams are pretty equal. And if you lose one and you're down to 10 men, it kind of, and Wembley, as they all say, saps your strength a wee bit.
Well, it's as far as England are concerned, they got no complaints about making excuses about what might have happened if this happened, because while winning the World Cup, they had a couple of games which, the Argentina game, when the Ratin got sent off and they went down to 10 men, we would never know the outcome of that game had he not got sent off. They were in full control. I remember the game. What I can remember of it, they were in full control, and he was the kingpin of their team. And he was sent off for no reason. I don't know how the referee knew what he called him in his Argentinian slang or whatever it was, but and then they had the Ramsey thing with calling them animals and all that. And how can you call them animals? You got Nobby Stiles in your team, and he was the animal. But that so it was all kind of swings and roundabouts, and I remember when you say to English people, had Jack Charlton not got injured, I said, don't go there, I think on paper, out the 2 teams, I'm a gambling man, and my money would have been on you boys. But talking about you and Denis, I think Eddie had the same problem with. Well, it's not a problem. He had the same thing with Jim Baxter. He was so in awe of Baxter. I think I might have even said it last time we did a show. He said he was standing when the buzzer went. He was standing there bouncing the ball, Baxter, and Eddie walked up behind him. He said, "I'm going to walk out behind Jim Baxter," and he said he's bouncing the ball, and he said to Eddie, "How much do you want to win today, son?" And Eddie went, "Oh, you just don't know. You really don't know." He says, "Well, we will win today."
Yeah.
He said, "All you got to do is kick that little ginger fella all over the pitch. And when you get the ball, give it to me, and we will win." He said. So that we was just trying to call him, because Eddie, I didn't really know that Eddie. I went over to Tennessee and stayed with him for a couple of weeks a few years back after my car accident, and he's telling me these stories sitting in his garden in Tennessee. And it was in Davy Crockett Drive, it was called. And Eddie would tell me what it was like playing with Baxter, and what it was like on that day with you boys. And it was pretty fantastic, wasn't it? And for the fans,
Yeah, the fans were a big part of it, Alan. But the other thing that a lot of people they don't bring up so much now was the confidence of Alf Ramsey. Because when Alf Ramsey went in that World Cup, Alf Ramsey come straight out and told the newspapers that England will win the World Cup. And he never changed from that. And I think that should never, ever be underestimated, because I think when your gaffer comes out in the paper and says them kind of things, and back then, people didn't really do that, Alan. They didn't come out like that. But Sir Alf was so confident in his team, he come out and he says, "We will win the World Cup." And he did it.
Well, he did it. Yeah. There's a few things that he said about that. I mean, Alan Ball always said they had 5 world-class players and he left himself out, or 4 world-class players, he left himself out, which Alan Ball was a world-class player. And if you have that in your team, when you think Maradona won it on his own, you on your home soil, Wembley's a big advantage. I could see why he was confident, But before the World Cup, Jim, you would never see the hero of the hour was, Jeff Hurst, who went on. I played with him at Stoke in his later years, but he, everybody thought going into it was going to be a Jimmy Greaves World Cup, didn't they?
Yeah. But I mean, then again, Alan, the other thing was with Jeff Hurst. When Jeff Hurst was at West Ham, the guy that was in front of him, he was a hell of a player, Johnny Byrne.
Yeah.
Johnny Byrne was a great target man. So I think that's what Ron Greenwood tried to do with Jeff Hurst, make him a target man.
Well, he started off as a right half, Jim, didn't he? Hurst, he played wing half for a long time.
Yeah.
And they couldn't find a position for him. So the last resort was to stick him up front because he had big shoulders. Yeah. And he used him as a target man. And he learned his trade by making runs. And that was really the story of the 1966 World Cup,
Two good feet, Alan. If he got a chance anywhere, he usually put it away.
Yeah.
I would think his stats would be pretty high.
Yeah, good player.
But Jimmy Greaves is one of my favourites, obviously. But I mean, it was awful sad that Jimmy wasn't in the team. But Sir Alf stuck by his guns. He left he left Jeff Hurst and Roger Hunt up front. And I mean, to leave Jimmy Greaves out of your team, oh my goodness.
Well, the other side of the coin, we could be doing this show today and England might not have won the World Cup in '66, and we'd be talking about him leaving Jimmy Greaves out, and it would have been that would have been the big talking point, you know. But those were the good old days with England. But
yeah, I remember just thinking back, Alan. I remembered when I was at Chelsea, and I was only 17, and Chelsea played not Sheffield Wednesday, played Manchester United at Old Trafford, and I got a phone call Friday afternoon from the secretary, from John Battersby, and he says, Jim, Terry Venables has got a bit of flu and he's doubtful, and the boss wants you to get to Manchester. So he says, if everything's okay, he says, I'll pick you up at the airport and I will take you on the plane to Manchester because it looks like you're going to be needed. And
yeah,
I thought, oh, fantastic. Anyway, I got on the plane with Mr. Battersby, we got to Manchester, got to the dressing room, and I was in there, and I seen Terry, seen the boys, and Tommy Docherty come over and had a word with me. He says, Jim, he says, I'm awful sorry, but Terry reckons he'll be okay. Terry is going to play. I said, it's okay, boss. I said, maybe next time. And that was amazing because I sat in the dugout with the boss and the 12th man and the physio. And Denis Law got 3 goals that day. He wasn't in the game, Alan. Can you believe this? Seriously. He wasn't in the game. His touch on the ball wasn't very good. He scored 3 headers.
I was going to follow on by saying, if I was to do a poll and go around, which I'm surrounded by Chelsea supporters when I go out anyway, but it was one man that Ron Harris didn't like marking, it was Denis Law.
Because
And they couldn't tell me why. They couldn't tell me why. You know, Greasy, he used to mark Greasy and he wouldn't get a kick, and because he was right, his cup of tea for Ron.
Yeah.
But Denis Law had that wonderful knack of when Ronnie Harris was about, and he must have said to his players, when I'm near Ronnie Harris, put it in the air.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Ronnie didn't like it. Ronnie didn't like that, and he couldn't kick him while he was up there. It was
No.
and Dennis, and that was why Ronnie didn't like playing against Denis Law. And
yeah. But the strange thing about that game, Alan, as you know, being a midfield player, Bobby Charlton that day was outstanding, totally outstanding, and picked up the papers the next day, and it was all Denis Law and his hat trick of headers.
Well, it would be, yeah. It would be,
like a midfield player, you think, I've laid on this, I've done that, and the goal scorers get all the bloody credit, all the glory hunters. But that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dennis
Law. Sorry, Tony.
You carry on. Yeah.
But Denis Law, I mean, to see him score them 3 goals was really quite amazing. And when he talks about Italy as well, Alan, he didn't like Italy because, like you talked about earlier on, he was a family man, was Denis, and they were put away for a couple of days a week. And although I think he scored 10 goals in about, I think it was 12 games, something like that. It was unknown for anybody to score that amount of goals in Italian football then, because they were all defensive, Alan.
It was all 1-0, isn't it? 1-0 was a big score.
One goal would win you the game. That was it. They would get behind the ball, and they used to call it the Catenaccio system or something like this. The guy that was manager of Inter Milan when Celtic beat them in the European Cup final was a guy called Helenio Herrera, and he was the guy that brought this system to Italy, this Catenaccio system, and he had all these players behind the ball. But Denis, Denis he had so many facets to his game, Alan. he just wasn't a striker, because when he first went to Manchester United, Denis was what they called an inside forward. He liked to score goals, but he liked to play in midfield. A bit like Di Stefano and Cruyff, he liked to be all over the place. It was Sir Matt Busby that made him play as a striker. And he didn't really fancy doing that. But once he went to Man United, he stayed up front all the time. But I remember him playing against the rest of the world, and he had a free role, and he loved that. And he was all over the pitch. He was here, there, and everywhere, and he still managed to score the rest of the world goal. But the things he could do, Dennis, he was quick, he was sharp, but he was always a wee bit kind of sneaky as well, Alan. You know, sometimes he'd turn his back on the goalkeeper as though he'd given up, and then he'd come back again. And sometimes he would catch the goalkeeper, you know, just having a wee moment to himself. You just didn't know what he was up to. And like you said, some defenders were afraid of him, because if they hit him, he'd kick them back. Absolute amazing footballer. He was.
But before he got to Manchester United at Huddersfield, can you remember what he was famous for?
No, Alan, I don't know.
He played for Huddersfield and he scored 6 goals in an FA Cup tie.
Right.
And it got abandoned.
Right.
I forgot what they beat. He scored the 6 goals, and they played the game again in the midweek, and they got beat 3-1. And he got the goal again. He got the 7 goals that they scored and got knocked out. But I think that must have caught the eye of a lot of people in that day. I know it did. This must have been 63, 64, something like that. So I'm about 12. But I can remember that. Who's this fella? Scored 6 goals at Huddersfield, you know. So that really, I think that kind of propelled him up there to, you know, that, because that never happens. You know, Jimmy Greaves used to do it in the first team football everywhere, but Denis Law, that must have been, he must have been so far ahead of those players at that time.
I mean, look at Chelsea. I mean, when you think of Jimmy Greaves and the goals Jimmy Greaves scored at Chelsea, and then you think about Bobby Tamblyn. You know, really, with due respects to everybody, had the skill in the game of scoring goals. And Chelsea, you know, back then, Chelsea with Jimmy Greaves and Bobby Tamblyn, it was quite amazing. And then, of course, Ozzy coming along as well. You know, Ozzy was probably a better footballer than Jimmy Greaves and Bobby Tamblyn as regards ability. But Ozzy could score some goals, and I always thought, looking at Ozzy from afar when I'd left Chelsea, I always felt that if Ozzy was on his own, sometimes he was a better player. And I think when players were around him, I think he would give the ball to other players, Alan. And I thought if Ozzy would have been a bit more greedier, you know, he had everything else, Alan, but he wasn't a greedy centre forward. He would pass it to other players when he was in a good position, like that. Whereas other goal scorers, they would take a chance, maybe miss it. They would take the chance, whereas Oz would maybe pass it.
Yeah, he had an all-round game. Well, he had the physique to do that, didn't he? He had the, you know, he could score.
Yeah, but I mean, Ozzy was feisty as well, Alan.
Well, I think that was after Blackpool, when he came back from Blackpool with a broken leg, and he said it'll never happen again. And I think that kind of changed his whole outlook on football. He would never get it done. And that was when the saying come in, I'll get my retaliation in first. And that was the way he looked at the game, that he was going to get them before they got him. But it was, you know, Emily News did him a favour without doing him a favour, because we would never, some people say Ozzy, we never see the best of Ozzy because of that broken leg. But I'm not a. I don't go with that. I think a broken
No.
leg is. I think a broken leg is a broken leg. It's not like a bad ankle or something like that. It's you get over broken bones, don't you?
Yeah.
But it was some player.
Yeah. But going back to Denis, Alan, somebody read out some stats for me on the. I think when it was in the paper or it was on the television. 18 hat tricks, Denis Law. You know, fantastic.
Yeah.
Four goals in a match. You know, and like you just said, six goals in a match. You know, you can't argue with that. It's jeez. I mean, some of them now, if they get 10 goals and they're a striker, they think they've hit the jackpot.
That's in a season, Jim, not in a game.
No, but you know what I mean? It's you know, I think your role models that you look at. I think, to be honest, if I had my chance back again, I really wouldn't change it, Alan, because I think having Denis Law as a role model and a lot of the players that were around at the time I was playing, I feel so fortunate to have played in such a good era. You know, football really, it's about different eras, isn't it? But
Of course.
I think 60s and 70s, you know, it was quite amazing. There was, you know, the standard and you know, it was and yet, you know, it wasn't publicized as much then as what it is now. But that's football. I'll always love football and long may it continue.
Yeah, it's going back to last night, saying about even last night with the Manchester United and Rangers game, there was that, you know, they kept bringing up, Ali McCoy's kept bringing up, you know, our supporters over there and, you know, the Anglo-Saxon, the England against Scotland and all that. But it will never be that way. It was the 60s and the 70s. Since they've let the foreigners come in and take over, it will never be the same. You know, they were British. They were all British players in them days.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were British fans as well, you know, and it were, you know, you couldn't see this mob today going to Wembley and carrying the goalposts and crossbars off the field, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like today this thing about he's one of us because it's infrequent now, whereas back in the day it was more frequent. The young players coming through, it is still the best way to run a team. I was looking at a thing. I don't know if you've seen it, Alan. It was on BBC this week, and it was about Real Madrid and about how they keep winning the European Cup. And they were talking about, you know, how they couldn't keep, you know, like the Galacticos, they couldn't keep spending all this money. So now what they're doing is they're spending the money on the best young prospects. But that's what a lot of the great managers of the past have done, Alan. Tommy Docherty started at Chelsea. Some of the young players he had at Chelsea was fantastic. And the thing was with Tommy Docherty would give him a chance. Jock Stein was the same. Possibly the best ever manager, Sir Alex Ferguson. His style was the team of 92 with 5, 6 young boys coming through into the Manchester United team. Beckham, the Nevilles, Paul Scholes, Nicky Butt, them kind of guys. And, you know, I wished really that the clubs in England would go more for that and the clubs in Scotland and give the young guys a chance instead of, you know, bringing all these foreigners in.
Well, it's, I'm afraid to say it's the same old story that it's money is the root of all the evil in in the modern game. There's no doubt about that. You know, I remember going down to West Ham when Harry had a good team at West Ham, you know, and
Yeah.
watching people like Di Canio. And as much as, you know, I think we got to a stage in the 80s when I went to Seattle and came back, and I thought the game over here was in the 80s was on its knees. It was
Yes, yes.
in a bad way, you know. It was a Charles Hughes thing, the Route One football and all that, and it needed getting hold of and changing. And you got, you know, it was really, look at Arsenal, the Invincibles. They used to play teams with only like 2 English people in the side, you know. He had, you know, it was it became a world game overnight. Well, and the Bosman ruling, obviously, that we would have liked, Jim, but we'd have been a lot better off. I wouldn't have trouble with my knee today if we had Bosman ruling, would I? You know.
Yeah, but it's like I say, Alan, and the other thing that I can't get my head around is to bring in a young player, and he does the business, and he's so, you know, he's getting on in the game. He becomes an international, and then because some clubs, because he's come through the academy, they think that's good business to sell him because it's cost them nothing. But I can't see the point of bringing Alan Hudson through, looking after him, giving him good habits, giving him a platform to come through, and then he gets to 19, 20, and they get an offer for him. Alan Hudson's gone. I can't see it. Why not keep Alan Hudson? And the other thing about it is when other young players are going to sign for clubs, surely they must look at it and think, well, will I get a chance at this team? Will he play this manager? Will he pick young players? But I suppose now, Alan, they're under that much pressure. You know, time is of the essence.
Well, I've only got to say that for sometimes it falls into your path, and Chelsea have been the luckiest out of the lot of them over the last 2 years because of exactly what you're saying. Chelsea wouldn't have had Carlton Palmer.
Yes, Cole Palmer.
Cole Palmer. They wouldn't have had him, and God knows what position they would be in today without this kid. He's just something else, you know, and that was all because of the system at Manchester City. Then where it just got ridiculous, you know. He spent £100 million on Grealish, and then 18 months later he's 4th choice.
Mm-hmm.
He can't get a game. He brought him on last night and he scored, or the night before, and he scored 2-0 up. And Manchester City 3 years ago would never be 2-0 up anywhere in the world and get beat 4-2.
No, I agree with that.
And it's coming back to bite him. It's all coming back to bite him now. You can't, that system won't last forever. It's gone crazy, and it's all because of exactly what you just said, Jim. It's all because of money. You know, we go back to the Osgood and me getting rid of it. Everything was money. It was, and it's ruined a lot of lives as well.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, Alan, if the club come to you and they say, well, we've had an offer from so and so, you've got permission to speak to them. You as a player, you're thinking, well, what am I going to do here? Obviously, they're letting me go. So, what do I do? I don't really want to go, but what's the point of staying if they're ready to let me go? So it's a bit of a conundrum, really, for a player.
Well, it's for what reason they want to let you go, Jim. It's like again, it's money. It's I remember when I know this show's about Denis, and I bet Denis would have a few stories to tell us. But I remember when Ozzy and I actually left Chelsea, and I remember the day of agreeing to go to Stoke City. Him and I were sitting in a restaurant in the King's Road, and a couple of people came in, and the governor of Alexander's was there, and he said, you know, they were talking about where, and we were saying, where do you want to go? And we were talking about who's going to come in for us. Where do you want to go? And the phone was on the wall, and it didn't ring all day, you know. And then next thing you know, Christine Matthews called an hour after the restaurant had closed, and we were still sitting there having a glass of wine. And he said, Camilla, the governor, said, Alan, it's for you. So I've looked at Ozzy as much as say, you know, it's not for you. You know, nobody wants you. And I came back up and said, can you go to the hotel tonight to meet Mr. Waddington at Stoke City? So I said, yeah, I can. And I just left there and went straight up to see him, and that was it. That was done. Yeah. Nothing from Chelsea, nothing from the manager, nothing from the chairman, nothing from nobody. And I never see anyone at Chelsea again. I went into the ground. I don't even think I went into the ground and picked my boots up. I must have. I got someone else to do it. But I never set foot into Stamford Bridge. I had to go into Stamford Bridge the following morning to see Tony, and I picked my boots up because I had to sign the contract. But I met Tony on the Friday night at the hotel in the West End, the famous hotel for Stoke City. And that was that. I went out and celebrated on the Friday night. Picked my boots up on the Saturday, signed the contract, and Mr. Waddington said to me, do you fancy coming to Ipswich today to watch the game? I said, who's playing at Ipswich? He said, your new team, Stoke City. I said, I'm not watching Ipswich and Stoke City, mate. I said, I'm off up the West End. I had to go up to up to Fleet Street and do a story, and that was it. That was finished. Not even a goodbye, nothing. Not even nothing.
No.
And you know, and it's so. It's in many ways today. It's a better world for the player today. Far much better. You could turn around and just say to your agent or your manager, sort that out for me, and it's done. You know.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. That would be in the real world, wouldn't it? That would be the perfect world. You know.
Yeah. Like Tommy Docherty, my history with Tommy Docherty is quite unbelievable. He tried to sign me when I was 15, but I'd already promised to go to Leeds. He signed me when I was 17. I asked for a transfer 3 times, Alan. The first time I asked him for a transfer, he chased me out of the office. He says, bugger off. He chased me out of the office. And the second time, he says, I hear what you're saying. He says, but I'm telling you no, I'm not telling the directors that you've asked for a transfer. And the third time, when I asked the third time, I didn't hear from him. He just said, okay, I'll leave it at that. And the next thing, he come to talk to me, and he says, I want you to go to a certain hotel tonight. And there's a manager will be at that hotel, and you can speak to him. And I said, okay. I said, fair enough. I said, but who's the manager? And he wouldn't tell me who the manager was, and he wouldn't tell me who the team was. So I walked in the hotel, and I'm looking around thinking, this it was coming, and I could see this big guy walking towards me. It was Alan Brown from Sheffield Wednesday, and he come walking. Well, that was my introduction to Sheffield Wednesday. And then after that, Alan, when I left Chelsea and I went to Sheffield Wednesday, he tried to buy me back. I know for a fact. He rang Alan Brown, tried to get me back to Chelsea, and then he's signed me for Manchester United. He's put me in the Scotland squad. he's let me go from Manchester United, let me go to Southampton. What do? You know, how do you work Tommy Docherty out?
We can't.
But,
No.
but in saying that, Alan, you know, the thing I loved about Tommy Docherty was he was good fun, but you could have a laugh with him. But most importantly, he'd give young players a chance. And I always thought that was great. But he was very ruthless, Alan.
Well, he was ruthless. I think the problem with that, I knew Tommy, and then later, I think you get to know more about them in later years, don't you? When you're playing under them, and I always got on well with Tommy as a kid because I was in the youth team with young Michael, and we were big buddies at that time, and we used to play together and play well together. And I was quite upset when he went to Burnley. They got rid of him to Burnley and couldn't understand it. But that Tommy see that he wouldn't get in the first team there, and he had a better future up there, Michael. And but he did things in mysterious ways, Tommy. You know, and I think it come out. He see football as a platform for a good living and a good laugh. You know, I mean, he made fun of football, really.
Oh,
you know,
that was his greatest gift, Alan. He could laugh at himself.
Yeah.
He didn't take himself too seriously. That was the way he was. I mean, some of the laughs that we had with Tommy Docherty was unbelievable, and the experiences we got, and in the time I was at Chelsea, we were all over the world.
Yeah.
We went everywhere. It was quite amazing.
Yeah.
Well, this podcast has now gone full circle because obviously, you know, we're using it as a tribute for the great Denis Law, and of course, Tommy was there when Denis left United.
Yes,
and by all accounts, they had a big fallout over that. I mean, did you ever speak to Denis about that, Jim?
Well, the thing was when I signed for Man United, when I left Wolves. Denis had just gone to Manchester City, and there was all kinds of stories and all the rest of it. But I wasn't a tittle tattler, Tony. I wasn't really always interested in the gossip side of it. I just wanted to get on with my career. I was very focused on what I wanted to do, but I didn't know anything at all. And of course, when Tommy Docherty let Denis go, I think I heard about it on the radio, and I thought it was really strange. But the strange thing about that season when United went down, that I was there, the game, we were losing 1-0, the goal from Denis, and the crowd come on the pitch to get the game abandoned. And then they got them back off again, and it started again, but they come back on again, and it got abandoned then. Well, I was one of the first down the tunnel, and I went into our dressing room, and sat in the corner was Denis in his gear. He was still in his blue and white shirt, and he was sat with his knees up round about his chin in the corner of our dressing room. And as soon as I walked in, I looked at him, I went over, and we had a wee embrace, and I said, "You okay?" He said, "Nah, not really." And the next thing, Tommy Docherty come in. And I thought, "Oh God, here we go." With Denis in our dressing room. But nothing happened. Tommy Docherty walked over and he shook hands with Denis. And I thought, thank goodness for that, because I thought if it goes off here, it'll be fun and games. But nothing happened. And of course, Denis went back into the Man City dressing room. But that
was the day that I scored at the Bridge, I think.
Right.
I scored away. I scored for Stoke at the Bridge. Denis scored it up Main Road. And I think on the Monday night, we played Manchester United, your last game. You were already relegated. We played on the Monday night, and we got into Europe.
That's right, Alan.
Yeah. That was that same Saturday.
That's
So,
right.
I remember getting on the train coming back and it said Denis Law Scotland at Main Road,
Yeah,
which obviously put Manchester United down. And
yeah.
then on the Monday night, we had to play Manchester United at the Victoria Ground on Monday
That's
night. It
right,
was like,
Alan.
yeah. So it
That's
was
right.
the irony of crossing or sliding doors or whatever on that night. And
Yeah. Yeah, the thing was, it was everybody that, of course, the papers tried to make out that Denis had put Man United down, but that wasn't the case, Alan. What had happened was Birmingham was in big trouble as well, and they actually won. I think they won the last 3 games, and that's what kept them up. So that's what put us down, really. It wasn't.
well, at the end of the day, you Denis Law's like you, like me. You want to do your best when you go out and play through your plan for, and he scores a goal. I mean, it'd have been. He could have missed it quite easily. I mean, he backheeled it in, didn't he? Could have easily made that. I know a lot of centre forwards today would have missed it, would have fell over it. Nicholas Jackson at Chelsea, he would have fell out. Burner at Chelsea.
Well, was he actually trying to miss it?
That was Denis. You know, I don't think.
Only he knows that.
I don't think Denis has ever scored a goal like that. It was just his ability. He improvised and he'd missed it, so he's flicked it and he's missed his front foot and he's flicked it with his other foot and it's in the back. Alex Stepney's looking at him as, you know, those. He can't believe it.
What you done, yeah.
He's caught. Everybody's caught by surprise.
For those modern day players, Jim, could you tell them what improvisation means?
Probably more money, Alan.
Okay, well, we should really wrap up the podcast now. I mean, you've given us so much good stories.
Well, it's a shame that Eddie Gray never came on. First thing I was going to say to Eddie, how impressed I am with his kid at Tottenham. His kid's done unbelievable.
Yeah, terrific.
In a bad side, they've been so poor. Tottenham, they're scoring a lot of goals, letting a lot of goals in.
Yeah.
But through it all, this kid has been outstanding. He was been superb out of position.
Absolutely, Alan.
I seen him play for Leeds last year before when we had Eddie on the show, and I said he was magnificent at the Brits the other night. And then now he's gone there, and he's the only one that can walk out that dressing room. And the Swedish lad has been their best player, and young Gray has. And I was going to say to Eddie, you must be very proud of this kid. He's done the family name proud, and that's the way. That's the way you look at it. He could have easily, gone under this kid, playing out of position, blamed everything else, but he's been outstanding. Last night again, he was their outstanding player. He's been terrific. So,
Jim, just to wrap up, and just finishing it on Denis, where exactly would you put Denis in the pantheon of Scotland footballers of the past? Is he number one?
Yeah, he's definitely number one. Kenny chases him very close. Kenny Dalglish. Denis Law, definitely up there. Like I said, I think it was in his career 18 hat tricks. I can't believe that. And 4 4s. And like Alan said, he's got a 6 in a game. And, total world-class player. Went to Italy and destroyed the Italian defensive system. They give him a ransom to stay in Italy, but because he didn't want to be there in a hotel two nights before a game, Jimmy Greaves suffered the same stuff.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah,
Jimmy couldn't handle it.
Alan, would you say he's the greatest Scottish player that you've come across?
Absolutely.
I wouldn't say he's a great Scottish player. I think there's so many different types of players, isn't there? With Jim and I were talking earlier on the Jim Baxter of this world. I said to Jim, if Jim Baxter would have come down to England 5 or 6 years before he did. I see him play at Fulham for Nottingham Forest, and I thought, what are you doing? Why have you come down here? You know, he was magic, mate. He was magic. You know, if Baxter came down here, you talked about Scottish players, and I think Jim would come into that bracket had he stayed at one club for so long. You know, and this is a problem you got when players move about. You know. I think I said first time when Jim come on the show, you know, what was all that moving about, you know? And he says, well, if there's an inkling that they don't want me, I'm off. And that was basically why I left Chelsea and I left Stoke. They didn't want me. They wanted the money more than they wanted me. It's like a marriage. Move on and get the best out of what you do. You find that most players stay at clubs either because they're truly loyal, or nobody wants them. Nobody else wants them. You know, but your point is, you know, I think Chelsea, they go back to the people before us would say Hughie Gallagher, the great Hughie Gallagher, you know, that scored 5 for Scotland. They are still the only man. And, you know, I remember Tommy Baldwin, from Gateshead, you know, he used to go drink. He drank with the Hughie Gallagher's boys in Gateshead and all that. And I was writing a book, and I said, please, can I mention their father? You know, because he walked in front of the train and all that. Terrible, terrible story. And he was magic. You know, he was 5'5", and you know, I reckon he was down the King's Road. He was worse than us, you know, which is great. You know, so you know, in the history book, people are different. Denis Law, there would just be when I told you about Rodney Marsh and down Shepherd's Bush, say he's king before Stan Bowles got there, but he used to imitate Denis Law. You know, that's greatness. That was greatness. And Denis Law he was just a one-off player of that position. You know, he was superb on the floor and he was superb in the air. You know, there's not many like that. If you spoke with Denis, you'll think, cool. It's like having David Speedy on here the other day, and he could out-jump any defender, you know. But Denis had that, as Jimmy said, he was cheeky, he knew, he was cunning, he was, you know.
He was a proper footballer. Yeah. The other thing I have, Alan, I have a wee thing about this. You know, people talk about Messi and Ronaldo, and I always think, you know, this is me. It's always in the back of my head. I don't think they are as good as Pele and Maradona.
Well, yeah.
And you know, I've got various reasons why, and I think about.
Well, I think another thing to be said about that is, you know, you see Harry Kane go over to Germany and break the records in one season, in a not so good Bayern team, and that you know, Osgood could have went to Spain and broke all records in 1970. He was the best centre forward in the world in my eyes, and you know,
disagree with that at all.
Maradona, what he done in Italy was incredible. Won them their first championship, and he's still, well, he's just untouchable, the fella. But that's the toughest question ever, Tone. Was he the greatest? Because was Jimmy Greaves the greatest? You know.
Do I think that?
Well, around Chelsea,
I think as a goal scorer, I don't think England's had a better goal scorer.
He was a scorer of goals, James. Yeah.
He was on the end of things. But at the same time, Alan, you got to appreciate he knew where to go in the box. It could be a crowded box, but he would get his foot to it or he would flick it in. And the other thing was he didn't have to score goals outside the box. He would dribble in and leave the keeper on his backside, really, and just pass it into the nets. And the other thing with Jimmy Greaves is he didn't take penalties.
No, right. Yeah.
Penalties are a big thing, Alan. You know, you can get 6, 7, all depending on circumstances. Maybe sometimes 10 penalties a season. Let me
Yeah,
get
yeah,
any of them.
yeah.
And
Anyway,
neither did Ozzy. Ozzy didn't take penalties.
no, he missed one early on, and I don't know why. He should have took one night against the Swedes when we got knocked out. If he'd have took it, we'd have won. We'd have won the cup again. But there you go.
And I don't think Denis took penalties. George Best didn't take penalties.
No, no.
Marvellous.
Great to see you, Jim. Thanks for coming
Brilliant,
on.
Alan. Loved it. It's been terrific.
And condolences and everything else to the great man's family. It was,
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
you know, the show's kind of turned out different because we were hoping Eddie Gray would come on and give us another insight into it. But
Yeah,
I think the most important thing to be said about Denis, you know, you can come across great players. I always say, like great singers, great actors, and all that, and then you can meet them and you can turn you off, you know. But Denis was just an ordinary lad, and he never, like Bobby Moore was probably the greatest I've ever met. That he was so humble, and you wouldn't even
Yeah.
know he was a footballer.
definitely. Yeah,
Wouldn't know he
yeah.
was a footballer. Denis never gives no. You know, I bet you could go out with him for the night and he wouldn't. Not like Jim, he wouldn't talk about football, you know.
No, he
But-
wouldn't.
No.
He just told.
Yeah.
I'm going to finish on a wee note with you, Tony and Alan, if you don't mind. This is
Oh,
what
go
I
on.
think.
Yeah.
I'll just get up. I'll just get something, and I'll come back to you.
My betting it's got something to do with Wembley in 1967.
No,
No?
not quite. In a way, yet. You see that?
Hold
You
it
see
up,
it?
Jim.
Hold it up a bit
Yeah,
more, Jim.
yeah.
We can't quite make it out.
That's me and Denis. That's when I met Denis.
Ah,
At Sheffield Wednesday. Can you see it?
yes. Yeah, just
Right.
yeah, there's a bit of a glare from the window, but yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. And this is me and Debbie,
Clean
my
your
wife.
windows then.
This this is me and Debbie when we were with the Law family. I'll treasure it forever.
Oh,
I
lovely.
bet. I
That's,
bet.
that's a nice way to bring the podcast to a close, Jim. It's been great having you on. And
Lovely,
we're
Tony.
definitely going to do it again.
Thanks, mate. I'm going to cry again.
Oh, no, don't do that.
Cheers, lads. Thank
God bless
you.
Jim. Thank
Cheers,
you very
Jimmy.
much.